guys, can you hear me? Okay. All right. Let me share my screen. Let's go here. Where to go? Yep, here it is. There it is. Just need the slideshow button. Oh, oh, where's my slideshow button? Oh, there it is. Okay. Hopefully you can all see me and hear me. And so today we're going to talk about current trends in illicit drugs. Oh, I did the OK button. All right. But first, a word about terminology. So the correct terminology, and I will use this from now on, is actually NPS, new or novel psychoactive substance. So if you ever want to know more about this topic, just look up NPS and the internet will open up for you. And I also learned a lot from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC. So we're going to talk about new and novel psychoactive substances today United Nations uses to classify NPS. I'll talk to you about a few drugs from each class, and then hopefully I can get this little 4-minute video to work at the very end. I might need to call on Kara to help me do that, to learn how to use the drugs wheel as an educational and training resource. So those are some of the things that I would like to cover today. So why this topic? Well, I think this topic is always a good topic because the drugs are constantly changing. But I have to tell you that I was super annoyed and fired up. I play this game online called Words with Friends, and for whatever reason, I started to get Breeze ads every time in between my little games, because they have to show you ads, and I'm like, Breeze, what is this stuff? And come to find out, it is microdosed THC and something called lion's mane, which I found out is from a mushroom. So it's microdosed cannabis and mushrooms in a can. And you can see from this ad that they call it a social tonic. And you can also see in this ad that it's subtle enough for mom to try, or it is stackable for your ideal experience. You can also see that it's super expensive. So 6 cans can be yours for $50. And so this just fired me up even more after I kept seeing this ad for Breeze, and their substitute for alcohol. So you'll hear this young woman talking over the ad going, well, I just turned 21, but I don't drink anymore because I don't want, as you can see here in this little bullet point, I don't want any hangovers or regrets. And so I'm going to use Breeze as if this isn't going to give you any hangovers or regrets. And you can buy, OG, incredible. And so, of course, as I was doing research on Breeze online, now I am starting to get ads on my phone for something called Delta. And so it's another drink that has some sort of THC in it. So whatever you're looking on your phone, obviously they're listening to you and they're watching you, and what you look up. So this is what fired me up about this whole topic. But I digress. Um,
Chris, your voice is
so
breaking a
in
little bit.
2013, United Nations, it is okay. I don't know what is going
Sometimes
on here.
if you turn off your
Oh, let me
video,
try something
it
else.
it
Hang on.
helps with the bandwidth
One
issue.
more thing. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So in 2013, the United Nations established the Early Warning Advisory. It's the first global monitoring system on new psychoactive substances. It is a voluntary online data system. So obviously, it's only as good as the countries that put data into it, but there's 142 countries involved, and they are reporting on 1,245 individual NPS. Aren't you glad we don't have to talk about all those drugs? However, what I thought was very interesting is that the NPS are broadly classified into the 6 effect groups, which we will be talking about: the said hypnotics, the opioids, the cannabinoid receptor agonists. So I learned a new term, the SCRAs. So not the SSRIs, but the SCRAs, the stimulants, the hallucinogens, and the dissociatives. So they had a report from which I took a lot of data that was just published several months ago, July of 2024, called The Current NPS Threats, Volume 7. Now, that also sounds like some sort of rock album, does it not? Okay. So where's why can't I click my slides here? Okay. So from that report, you can see the emergence of NPS by effect group over the last dozen years or so. Very beautifully color coded for you there. And it looks to me like, stimulants basically at the bottom, kind of there's lots and lots of new stimulants coming now in 2023. They didn't have the complete when they did this report, so that's why that thing looks so small. The total number of NPS from 2013 to 2021 had consistently ranged from 400 and 500 substances each year. There was a significant drop in 2022, only 44 new drugs or new substances, and in 2023, 31 NPS. So that they never explained why. Of the NPS that were presented in 2023, 36% of them were synthetic opioids, and then the stimulants and the cannabinoid receptor agonist each accounted for about a quarter in drug classes. The other thing they report on, which again, absolutely fascinating to me, is the different types of toxicology case reports. So they had 2,801 reports of NPS in 2,000 toxicology cases, which tells you right away that most of the cases had multiple drugs involved, and they identified over 100 new drugs. In this study that they looked at, the 2,000 cases, 21% female, 58% male, and then 21% where they didn't know the gender, it was not reported. And then they divvy those up into three kinds of cases. The post-mortem cases, most of those come from North America, which has, again, a very robust, the medical examiners all get together. And then 55% of those cases that mostly came from North America involved, as you can imagine, fentanyl, as well as all these other drugs, including the NPS. Then they have a chunk of cases that are called clinical admission cases. There was 391 cases there. Those largely involve something called bromazolam, which I had never heard of. So I was like, oh, wow, I'm learning stuff. So bromazolam, and not clonazepam, but clonazolam. So I'm like, interesting. And then finally, they have a big chunk, 743 cases called drug use cases. And the definition of a drug use case is an instance of drug use within a criminal context. So perhaps like a seizure by a seizure of drugs by the police and things like that. And 90% of these cases came from East Asia, with almost 3/4 involving ketamine and a quarter involving ecstasy. So right away, you can see just the diversity across the world of what is happening. And again, I'm just presenting to you the very tip of the iceberg of this report, just some of the highlights. So let us dive into each of the categories. Again, I may be going at a bit of hyper speed so that we get to talk at the end, but let's start with the designer benzos. And so the first drug that I encountered was the etizolam or etizolam. That's been around since 2012, and it's actually approved for medical use in, 3 countries around the world, but it did start to, as you can see by this chart, there was 3 law enforcement encounters, and then what they do is they compared how many law enforcement encounters when the drug first came out, and then in 2021, how many law enforcement encounters there were. So you can see, and this actually, I apologize, this is not the United Nations report. This is actually the DEA. So this is the United States. So I apologize for shifting gears without telling you, but you can see there's something called diclazepam. You can see the flu bromazolam, so that's related to the bromazolam that was in the United Nations. And then obviously the flu alprazolam is a analog of Xanax. And so you can see that over time, different ones sort of take the lead. And so, at least in the United States, these five drugs that were designer benzos all sort of came to the forefront, so much so that the DEA actually temporarily scheduled all of these five drugs and their analogs into Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. That happened 2 years ago. And actually, this July, they're going to fall off of Schedule 1. So I'm not really sure what's going to happen after July of 2025. Perhaps they will keep them in Schedule 1, but stay tuned on that. But it's just amazing because I was like, I've never heard of any of these drugs, and yet they're, into the thousands of reports by the DEA. So those are some of the designer benzos that are out there. They typically are found as pills, liquid, or powder form. And of course, they get mixed into everything else that your friendly neighborhood drug dealer is selling to you. So, beware. The next sedative hypnotic, so staying in the same category that I want to talk about, is called xylazine. Now, this one I have heard of because I've seen a lot of the news reports. This is actually, they call it a non-opioid sedative painkiller from the 1960s, but it's actually an alpha-2 adrenergic receptor agonist. So it's like super powered clonidine, and it's only licensed for CNS depression in humans. It is oftentimes mixed with fentanyl. It's called trank or trank dope. And again, this came from the United States. There was an actual article called Xylazine and Overdose Deaths and Forensic Drug Reports. So from 2019 to 2022, they noticed that it appeared in 16 states, and as opposed to two states that had no forensic reports. So back in 2019, not many states have heard of it. In 2022, it had been reported in every state except for two. And then the other data point is that in 2022, there were at least 43 states with xylazine related deaths, and the highest were in Vermont and Connecticut. And so, again, just something that gets mixed in with other drugs and then makes it harder for people to come back from an overdose, and they often do not come back. So that's sort of the problem with the xylazine. Um, I'm going to switch gears to the next category, which is the synthetic opioids. So the opioids I want to talk about are the things called nitazines. I believe that's how you pronounce it. And the one I read about was called ISO. That's the street name. It's isotoniazine. And you can see that you can tell what these are because they all end with nitazine. So there are many drugs in this class, including, and they're not dergs, they're drugs. I always see a typo on the morning of the presentation. I hate that. There's protonitazine, there's metonitazine, and there's etonitazine. These were actually developed in the 50s by a company called Ciba. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember Ciba. But they were never approved for medical use in humans. They came back out as street drugs in 2019. The thing that blew me away is that these are 10 to 40 times stronger than fentanyl. And you already know that fentanyl is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. So that is kind of what blew me away when I was reading about these. They appear as a white, a yellow, or a brown powder, sometimes appearing as blue tablets, and obviously everything in between. And of course, they are often mixed with fentanyl, heroin, and fake oxycodone, pressed into fake oxycodone pills. And since tweeted in 200 plus deaths in Europe and North America. So again, these are starting to come to the forefront as one of the novel substances out there. This one also blew my mind. I had heard about it. I just got to learn more about it. This is a synthetic opioid called Tianeptine, or maybe it's Tianeptine. I'm not sure, but the street name is gas station heroin. This was actually developed as an antidepressant and used as an antidepressant in 66 countries without them really knowing what it was. One article I read, it kind of cracked me up. I couldn't believe that they published this. They said, well, it had three rings, so we thought it was a tricyclic antidepressant. I was like, oh my goodness. So it was called Stablon, also called Coaxyl and Tatinol, and again has been used throughout Europe, Asia, and South America as a pretty good antidepressant. And sure, if you were taking an opiate 12.5 milligrams 3 times a day, I bet you would feel a little bit better. Um, Oddly or interestingly, it has never been approved by the FDA in the United States, but you can get it in the US as a nootropic, otherwise known as a cognitive enhancer. So that's really scary. It is a standard mu opioid receptor agonist. And again, just showing you sort of where it's come from since from 2000 to 2013, they had one call per year in that decade or so, and then they started to get dozens of calls in 2014, and then they got 391 calls in 2023. So again, it's slowly increasing. The first known U.S. deaths occurred in 2018, where two men in separate incidents died after they had ordered some of this stuff online. Um,
Chris, this looks like
again, there,
Chris, this looks
there,
like over the counter
yes,
packaging.
over the counter.
No, it's
Yes, it's super scary. And there's this thing called Neptune's Fix, I guess, which has made the news. And that's this, I don't know if you can see my arrow. Oh, you probably can't. But there at the top of that picture, Neptune's Fix is a tianeptine elixir, which is mixed with synthetic cannabinoids. I don't know which ones, but 2 years ago, 13 people in New Jersey were all admitted into the ICU because of this stuff, and there is currently a wrongful death lawsuit against the one of the manufacturers, I think, that died in Ohio using this Neptune's Fix stuff. So again, it's pretty scary that you can, as they call it, get it in a gas station, therefore gas station heroin. And again, there was this huge story last summer, which I missed, on NPR, and that's where I got a lot of this information. So yeah, this tianeptine or tianeptine, again, super kind of scary stuff. Um, but a great antidepressant, quote unquote, according to the French. I was like, okay, interesting. All right, we switch gears again to the SCRAs, the synthetic cannabinoid receptor agonists. Now, these I have heard from my clients. I didn't hear of HHC, but I have heard of Delta 8 and Delta 10. And as we all know, you know, the weed that we know and love and has been around since the 60s, at least, in America, and probably way earlier than that, is the Delta 9. So then they just sort of changed the positioning of a couple of molecules. And so they created Delta 8 and Delta 10. And so as it turns out, if you take CBD, um, which is cannabidiol, it's not THC itself, but if you take CBD and you add acid and heat in varying combinations, you can get Delta 8, Delta 10, or you can get this new thing I learned about called HHC, called hexahydrocannabinol. So these are called the semi-synthetic cannabinoids because they come from CBD or they come straight from THC. These come in all kinds of things. I'll show you a picture coming up. And this was a huge report that the United Nations did: e-liquids, vape capsules, edibles, gummies, and herbal material. Just a little snippet: between 2021 and 2022, the U.S. Poison Centers received over 2,000 cases of Delta 8 exposure, and unfortunately, 41% were pediatric patients, and most of those, not all of them, which is kind of scary, but most of those were unintentional poisonings. So again, people are taking the Delta 8 because it kind of cures all their problems and cures all their anxiety and all this great stuff. But the undesired effects are respiratory problems, confusion, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, and then sedation. But then on the other hand, paranoia and panic attacks. So these are the things that the kids And here's a lovely picture. I'm not sure what country this is coming from, but I loved the sign where it said, "Nice to weed you." Um, it's probably German, but maybe somebody on the line is smarter than this. And so you can get your CBD and your HHC alternatives. It says get it here. So it's like maybe get it here. And then on the right were things from the United Nations report of ways that this comes. And I looked at those peach gummy rings and I'm like, oh my God, I love those peach gummy rings, but those are not just peach gummy rings. They are products that contain some of these SCRAs. And of course, they're speaking of rock and roll and music and purple haze and stuff like that, so they kind of use old names to lure people to use these. And then here's a premium HHC vape called Mellow Yellow. So all kinds of interesting allusions to music here. But yes, nice to weed you. Yeah, wow. Okay. Let us move on from the SCRAs to the stimulant category. So the one I learned about was called Eutalone. So Eutalone is a synthetic cathinone, and as you know, cathinones are related to khat, Khat, also known as cat or khat, which is from the Middle East. But Eutalone is a synthetic one, synthetic form of khat. So it is a very potent CNS stimulant. It has street names of Red Bull. I mean, that's that, energy drink, but it's also called BK EBDB, which made me think of a robot like EBDB. So I don't know. That was interesting. Now, the supply in the United States has been surging since 2017, where there were only 10 reports, to 2021, when there were over 8,000 reports in the United States of this stuff. And in 2020, there was huge articles about 343 Eutalone involved deaths, with 75% of those deaths concentrated in Florida and Maryland. Once again, you can see that many of these drugs have this regional impact, probably just where it's entering the country, who knows? But of course, none of these were Eutalone only deaths. 82% of the deaths also involved an opiate. Most of the time it was fentanyl, and 56% of the deaths also involved a different stimulant. So again, these new psychoactive substances are just being mixed in to, the regular drugs on the street that we all know of. So the cocaine, the methamphetamine, the fentanyl, it's all being mixed in with these synthetic stimulants. I don't know if this is accurate. I don't like the term, but as you can see in the reference I placed there for you, they kind of call it psychoactive bath salts. And again, bath salts isn't a great term anyway. I think it's just a confusing term, but I just wanted to point that out to you in case you're looking this stuff up. If you look up psychoactive bath salts, you might read about Eutalone. Rounding out the discussion is we're at third base and heading home. So many new hallucinogens out there. I mean, it was making me dizzy. But the one that I will point out to you, they did a public alert about this in May of 2024. There's no fancy way to say it. It's just called 2F 2-oxo PCE, but it is a cousin or kissing cousin, I guess, of ketamine, a gin which resembles ketamine. It differs literally by one molecule. And so these are the only chemistry things I will show you. But if you look at the top picture, the ketamine has a chlorine in light green, a chlorine molecule right there off of the benzene ring. And then if you look in the middle picture, which is the thing we're talking about, the 2F2-oxo PCE, you can see that a fluorine is substituted for the chlorine. And then if you look at the one on the bottom, it's a fluorine, but it's at a different position on the circle. It's actually at the 3 position instead of the 2 position. So they call this stuff fluorexetamine. So it's got that kind of, ketamine kind of ending to it. And fluorexetamine is called 3F, 3-oxo. And the stuff that I was reading about was called the 2F, 2-oxo. Again, this is distributed as a powder, capsules, or tablet in Australia. And then as of May of 2024 in the US, very, very few reports, but that's when it kind of started out. There was 20 drug reports and 35 toxicology reports. And again, almost always mixed with fentanyl, but also mixed with three of the things that we just learned about: xylazine, nitazines, and designer benzos. So again, more stuff into the mix. And then this is your hallucinogen. So that's adding different kind of side effects and effects to the different reports. And then finally, the last category is the dissociative category. And this is something called 3-hydroxyphencyclidine or 3-hydroxy-PCP, of course, making it a sister or a cousin of PCP, what we know as angel dust. This usually presents again as liquid crystals or powder. This was initially formulated as a recreational drug until 2009. And I found very, very little information on this. Mostly I relied on a document that was presented in October of 2024 in Vienna, where they were talking about all the new street drugs. And then this one kind of came up on their list. So as you can see that it's been reported in 26 countries worldwide so far, including the United States. But when I tried to look for the US cases, I couldn't really see any. So maybe some of you out there can find the 3-hydroxy PCP cases in the United States. But worldwide, 3 people have died, one in Denmark, one in France, one in Germany. And then there have been 6 emergency room admissions so far, one in the UK, one in France, 4 in Australia. And of course, I think you're sensing a theme. The reports always include the presence of other drugs, benzos, opioids, and stimulants. So this is 3-hydroxy PCP. So now, and I might need your help, Kara, because I don't know if my thing will show it, and I don't know how to do. I'm afraid I'll get the settings wrong. So I don't know if I should stop sharing and have you do the YouTube thing for me. But I wanted to show people this club drugs wheel. So I'm gonna stop sharing and try to turn on my video. I'll turn it back off, but if I can get help, then that would be great. Or I can actually take questions and then we can watch it. We have some time. I'm seeing something about lion's mane. Yeah, it's supposedly from a magic mushroom. It certainly gets credit for it. Okay. Okay, interesting. Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully we could see this thing.
This is
Let me know when you're ready.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Great.
Can everybody
an
hear
online
it?
training session for the drugs wheel, a new model for psychoactive drug awareness. Classifying drugs can be complex, and until the latter part of the 20th century, drugs could be categorized by the main effects of the psychoactive substances found in nature, sedatives, stimulants, or hallucinogens. However, as times progressed, and with new developments in the emerging fields of medicine and psychiatry, new drugs emerged, and different models of classification appeared. Within the substance awareness field, the DASH model emerged, dividing the sedative category into depressants, such as benzodiazepines and tranquilizers, and analgesic or pain-killing drugs. However, by 2010, there was an influx of many new psychoactive substances. Many of us working in training and education added a miscellaneous or other category to allow for these new drugs. However, by 2011, the other box was overflowing rapidly. At this point, work began on the drugs wheel model. Working in tandem with DrugWatch UK, an informal group of professionals around the country, psychonauts around the world, and other people using drugs, on message boards such as Blue Light and Drugs Forum, We set about designing a model that could simplify the drugs landscape and provide a harm reduction approach to drug awareness. One of the central goals was for the model to include all known drugs, and so 3 new groups were created. In pathogens, drugs that mainly affect levels of serotonin; cannabinoids, to include the large amount of spice-type drugs or synthetic cannabinoid receptor agonists; and dissociatives, such as methoxetamine or MXE. The hallucinogen category was also renamed psychedelics to reflect more modern usage of the term. Adding these extra categories ensured that there was no need for a miscellaneous or other category, and all known drugs fit and continue to fit within the model. Inner and outer rings were also added to allow for further classification. For example, in this version, the outer ring shows established drugs and the inner ring newer drugs. These rings can be adapted for other purposes, for example, to divide categories by legal status or whether drugs are prescribed or non-prescribed. As of 2020, 820 new psychoactive substances have been reported to the European Union Early Warning System. Using the categories of the drugs wheel allows for harm reduction information to be given by category. This version of the drugs wheel gives a summary of the effects of each category. This and all versions are available free of charge from the drugs wheel website. The drugs wheel is a non-commercial project. Its Creative Commons license allows for it to be adapted as long as it is not used for commercial purposes and the licensing and credits remain in place. It has now been used around the world and translated into multiple languages. One very impressive adaptation has been the interactive online version created by the Australian Alcohol and Drug Foundation. There is also an interactive game version. You can download and print the instructions, board and cutout elements and play it as an educational game. Training videos are also available on the website. In collaboration with the Loop Harm Reduction Service, the Club Drugs is designed for display at festivals and nightclubs. One version adds a third concentric ring to explain the different drug laws in the UK. Another version combines the drugs wheel and the effects wheel into a large 1.5 meter poster. All of these are available for free. While the drugs wheel hopefully provides a helpful approach to drugs classification that can be adapted locally, it has been criticised for being too complex, as most drugs still fit into the original stimulant, depressant or hallucinogen model. These are valid criticisms. However, there are some new drugs such as MDAI that don't quite fit into these 3 categories. As with any model, the drugs wheel is not perfect, but it hopefully works well for certain settings. The website, thedrugswheel.com, also contains free harm reduction information sheets created by DrugWatch UK and Ireland. That ends the presentation. If you have any questions or would like more information, please contact me via the website. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kara. I appreciate that. I was just afraid I wasn't going to be able to show you that video. And so let me just for a second go back to what I downloaded. What was nice is you can go to the website, and if you want to teach people about the Club Drugs Wheel, you can just download like these 5 or 6 slides. And so it's just fun. It's interactive, and it kind of shows you basically what he just talked about on the video. But I just loved how they kind of put the slides together. So every time you click, you can talk about these different things. I was also super tempted to like download the board game. I was like, huh, the board game. Who knew? I love board games. So here's a board that would make an interesting activity. And so that's that. So just to summarize then and come to a close on my part, the correct terminology, and when and if I ever present this again, I will be calling it NPS, the new or novel psychoactive substances. That is the term that describes the emerging illicit drugs worldwide. Today, believe it or not, we were able to review 14 different NPSs from 6 different drug classes that we talked about. And again, the excellent resources that we learned about are the United Nations. The DEA has this National Forensic Laboratory, something, something. And then there's another, the Council for Forensic and Scientific Research and Education. But all of this gobbledygook and alphabet soup, you can put in these, these letters into your Google search thing, and it'll pop up. And then finally, I was just kind of astounded. I had never heard of the Club Drugs Wheel, and I just thought it was a really cool educational resource, which I will be going back to whenever I need information on some of this new stuff that's out there. But yes, I will stop sharing again. Let me go back here. And yes. All right. That's it for me.